Thanks for the opportunity to share an update on the Village Corridor Initiative as well. We've been working with the leadership team for this initiative, as well as Complete Streets Committee and the project management team with Stantec and Matt Drost from Maine DOT to figure out some options for next steps. So we wanted to give an update on the timeline and some upcoming milestones, as well as offer up some options to the council tonight and hopefully get some clarity on the direction going forward on some projects for spring and summer of next year. So we'll put this into slideshow and we'll kick it off. So like I just said, the goals for tonight are really the project status, timeline, and then some planning and design options for the downtown intersections moving forward. So to give a quick reminder, the Village Corridor Initiative geography is roughly from Upper Mass Landing Road north of downtown, south to the Breeze bus stop, roughly in front of Maine Beer Company. It includes areas within a quarter mile of transit stops or within 500, I guess 1,000 feet of a transit corridor. So you see Mallet Drive is in the downtown Village area. We're talking about south of downtown in the Village Gateway area, and then looking north as well to the northern corridor. So that's the general geography here, which ties into a lot of the plans that we've developed over the last couple of years together. Here is an updated timeline that we're working on. So you can see that we have extended the duration of the project a little bit. And tonight's discussion around spring and summer projects will be informative. But the idea here is that we want to include in the final project, if so warranted, any findings from activities this summer, spring or summer. So essentially what we're going to be doing is working on the build out analysis. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. That will yield a coordinated development design. One of the big goals for this initiative is to understand what kind of development we could anticipate over the next 10 years, maybe the next 50 years, and make sure that we're being thoughtful about the transportation service with that, and we're planning for that. So the build out and the coordinated development plan helps us to think about what kind of development to anticipate for that transportation corridor. We're plugging away at that, anticipate sort of a draft that we can workshop together here relatively soon. That's going to feed into transportation alternatives. And then the idea here is that there'll be some more public input. We'll have a survey, we'll have a couple of meetings where folks can understand what's going on and share some thoughts. But you'll see this second to last row here, final report and recommendations. What we want to see is essentially a near final report by June of next year, which is pretty on track with our goal. But you'll note that we left some space to actually finalize that and submit to DOT through September. And that way we'll look at any projects we do in the spring or summer as a validation of what's in the report. So that's the thought process there, and being in touch with Maine DOT. As long as we stick to that rough time frame of early fall, then whatever report we generate, we would be in the pipeline at the right time for DOT to take these recommendations and figure out how to fit them into their work plan. So if we're looking at this initiative as a way to not only build consensus, but also leverage state and federal resources, wrapping up on this time frame positions us to work with DOT to go out and do that. So that's the general time frame. Remember the vision that we've talked about, and the idea here is that we have a corridor that works for everybody, safe for bikers, walkers, attractive for visitors, and vibrant for local businesses. And so we're plugging away at that. You'll recall that we worked pretty hard in the fall to do a trial that was very informative at a number of levels. We learned that an all-way stop at Main and Bow did not significantly degrade traffic flow. So a key thing to build on there. We learned that there were real design issues and that we had an opportunity to learn from that. And hats off again to Public Works and Earl and his team. Thankfully, they were able to respond quickly to some of those issues early in that fall trial and mitigate them with quick adjustments that allowed us to learn. So we have really good confidence that we can learn from that and incorporate solutions into future designs for large turning vehicles, the location of pedestrian crosswalks, the appearance of what we do. We heard a lot about visual clutter with posts. I think moving forward, whatever we work on, we're going to be very thoughtful about how it's perceived and experienced. And that's a big learning from the fall. And then also great coordination with both the tour buses and the Breeze is critical. Not only did the flow from Bow onto Main dramatically improve, but we also learned a key lesson that trials they take a little bit more time than you anticipate. So good things to consider as we look to the future. And so with that, we want to kind of lay out a few options for you to consider. Again, these have been talked about over the last few weeks with the leadership team, Complete Streets Committee, as well as Stan Tech and Maine DOT just this morning to fine tune how we could approach this. And the way I think about this is when we originally talked about this at the end of last summer, heading into the fall, we had an option at Main and Bow to do a full demonstration project with Jersey barriers, really configuring the intersection the way that it ultimately would be, moving crosswalks, and doing that sort of full on demonstration project. So I think of that as sort of one end of the range of these options for you. And then the opposite end of that range is for us to collectively say, we don't need any trials. We've learned a lot. We can render and sketch potential permanent design changes and have a good understanding as a community what that's going to look like. So the one option on the end of the spectrum is the full demonstration project. The other end is to understand what we've learned and to move forward inexpensively and efficiently and on staff time, and put a lot of weight on renderings and landscape architect sketches. And then in the middle, there's sort of a hybrid to that, which would be to essentially move on from Main and Bow and trial and always stop at the School, Elm, and Main intersection, as well as to trial an adjustment to the traffic light at Mallet Drive. So those are the three. We'll talk a little bit more about each one and then give you a sense for some of the resources that the team has identified that will be helpful in terms of photo renderings and landscape architects sketches. So here's that full demonstration. This is a slide that came right out of a deck, I think, from late July of 2025. The idea would be to convert this intersection again to an all-way stop. A couple of key changes or differences rather that what this depicts than what we experienced in the fall is that you'll recall this the approach on Bow to Main, that we had the center lane cordoned off with posts as a pedestrian island. And the traffic was tight to the curb next to Patagonia that was approaching Main. And what we learned from that or validated from that was that created some issues for large trucks trying to turn right. Tough clearance with a telephone pole right on the corner. A lot of confidence, or the assumption with a lot of confidence, that by moving that approach on Bow from the right tight to the curb to the center would alleviate that pressure and make that flow much smoother. So we also would have the benefit of moving the crosswalk at Bow up to the intersection, as well as adding a crosswalk from Linda Beans on the south side of the intersection across to across towards the flagship store of LLB. Um, this is fairly labor intensive. Of the options, it's by far the most labor intensive. We would have Jersey barriers in the road, so it would have an appearance that folks might react to, and it would add a big lift to public works workload for the spring and summer too. So we just want to be transparent about the labor and the cost associated with this, but it would give the public a chance to see what we learned in action from the fall. The second one has to do, like I mentioned before, with the School and Elm intersection, which I think is pretty broadly understood to be a tough point on the corridor. The data reflects that. The School and Elm is considered by Maine DOT to be a high crash intersection. So it's been a focal point of the study so far. It would be anyway. The opportunity to do an all-way stop there would likely be a lighter lift than the Main and Bow intersection would be. And in the discussions that we had today with Stantec and with Maine DOT, we also have the option there with some extra work, but arguably not too much, meaning painting the street. This could actually Elm and School and Main, if it worked out as an all-way stop, that could be relatively easily converted to a permanent change if the community desired. So there is the idea of moving forward and learning something new, um, whereas looking at Main and Bow, arguably we would be investing in something that we've already learned about. This would be moving forward into a new opportunity to learn, and it also would have the added benefit of potentially being able to be converted to a permanent change if the community supports that. We would also look at eliminating some of the turning lanes and tightening that intersection up so that we can see hopefully safety improvements. And I've heard about this intersection a number of times. It came up again recently at the project review board from a traffic standpoint. So it's definitely understood to be a challenge. And then the other idea that came up in discussion was to test an adjustment to the light at Mallet Drive, and to currently the preference, if you're heading north towards Mallet, the preference is on the northbound. And the idea here that Stantec has come up with as a worthwhile test would be to give sort of the preference for traffic flow to be that left onto Mallet. And there's an expectation that that could, most times of the day, help traffic move a little smoother. Sophie made the good point this morning that we would want, going forward, a camera to detect where cars are queuing so that if there's different times of the day where traffic would like to behave in a different way, that the light is intelligent and can adjust its timing to facilitate continued flow. That's a good technology that's available to us. But the idea with this one really is to sort of build on what we learned at Main and Bow, move northbound, and then test School and Elm combined with a light tweak at Mallet to understand better that part of the corridor. So that's option two. And then option three is really, no further trials at this point. Let's utilize renderings and landscape architect sketches to get a view for what these permanent design changes would look like. So those are the three options. Here is an example of to give you a sense of the quality and what the community would have to look at and experience to get render input on. This is a photo rendering. And this is the type of thing that we discussed at the leadership team, and we discussed with Complete Streets as probably a really good tool for Main and Bow in particular, because that's a fairly complex intersection. And this, gives folks sort of a lifelike view without posts, without visual clutter, without the stuff that comes with a test or a trial or a demo. This would give folks a clean view of what that would look like and help them understand how they would experience it. So that's an example of a photo rendering. And then we also have some examples of a landscape architecture sketch where you can see underneath the sketch, there's actually, a real life image of the area that a landscape architect then sketches on top of to show how things would change. And so we would like to use these tools regardless probably of the scenario that you select. But this gives you a sense for what's available to the community to make good decisions without doing more trials or demos on the corridor. And we also have a budget that was discussed with the leadership team and then was unanimously endorsed by the Complete Streets Committee on the 18th. And this gives you a sense that, this is somewhat à la carte. So we would have the opportunity to sort of renegotiate this a little bit, but this fits into the appropriated and approved allocation for the Village Corridor Initiative. And we also have the benefit that that figure there, that 20,000, is matched 1-to-1 by Maine DOT. So the town expense here is half of that. So those are the tools that we have, and the idea would be that we would want to do some design work potentially with new demonstrations if that's where we'd like to go. But regardless of that, it's going to be valuable to do a photo rendering of Main and Bow, to do at least a landscape architect sketch of School and Elm in Maine, and then we wanted to reserve some additional resources for needs that will come up. For example, the railroad bridge project south of downtown. That could lend itself very well to a landscape architect sketch for the community to understand. But there are other areas as well that could also be very, very valuable to have a sketch. And so we wanted to leave a little bit of flexibility in how these are represented so that if we move forward in a way that we learn something and we adapt and we change, we've got some flexibility to be able to help the community understand what that would look like. So these are the resources that we would put in play to go ahead and move that forward. And then lastly, the next steps, if there's going to, hopefully there'll be some discussion on the three options. But to give you some context for where we're going from here, in the next month, we're going to be moving around pretty quickly here to move from sort of the pre-work and the analysis and the planning that Stantec has done and start to share that and start to make decisions and move forward on it. So January 13th, we're going to have Stantec do another presentation to the Complete Streets Committee with some initial transportation corridor concepts. On the 14th of January, we would like to host a special Village Corridor Initiative workshop and invite the planning board and the council with a particular focus on the build-out analysis and what that means from a development standpoint. Earlier in the day, we'll be sharing some initial data with some of the property owners in that corridor as well. We want to be very sensitive to their goals and ideas and how we represent their parcels. And so this workshop later in the day will build off of that prior event there with property owners. And it also ties in really well because the planning board currently is working on zoning updates to the commercial 1 and commercial 3 zones, which encompasses the sort of the southern gateway area of this study area. So there's a lot of synergy here, and we'd love to leverage that on the 14th. And then on February 3rd, the thought would be to have another workshop with Complete Streets, council, and maybe even the planning board to really start to see how the land use side, the build out, connects and integrates with the transportation side. So the 13th, we start to focus on the transportation elements, moving towards, real actionable ideas to respond to. January 14th, we focus on the build out and the development, and then we bring that together on the 3rd for a great discussion about where we're at and get some input on how we want to move forward. So those are the next steps that we're excited about. And with that, at this point, it would be really helpful to get some guidance or to understand any additional informational needs that you might have to see what makes sense moving forward for the spring and summer. Having a good understanding of that now or soon will be important to keep the project on track so that Stantec can go to work with DOT in town to move these things forward and stay on this timeline. So with that, open it up to discussion, take any questions.
Thank you, Brett. You're busy these days.
It's fun. This is good stuff.
Yeah. Any questions for Brett or thoughts? So just to be clear, you're looking for guidance on um if you go back to the slide with the options of what you're looking for guidance on, that would be helpful.
Yep.
Councilor Sparta?
Yeah, a couple questions, Brett. So I if we do the School and Elm intersection, if we go to the School Street like four-way stop idea, how would we do that without already having an all-way stop at Bow Street?
It's a great question. We discussed it at length today, and that was a question that I posed to both Stantec and DOT, and there was a pretty unanimous, almost immediate response that there would be a lot to learn from School and Elm combined with the light tweak at Mallet. That those two things together would yield data that would be valuable. We have a good sense that the always stop at Main and Bow slowed traffic a little bit, but also kept it moving consistently and predictably. With that understanding, the idea really of this second option is to focus on how that then would interact with School and Elm, and then also how that would interact with Mallet. And I think what there's an assumption baked into that, which I witnessed during the Fall Festival, and that is that during one, if not the busiest day I've ever seen in Freeport, the Main and Bow always stop was moving consistently, but the Mallet drive stop light was backed up all the way to Justin's Way almost consistently. And so by learning how to better manage the Mallet drive light, not necessarily wholesale changes, but to see if we can make some positive throughput with a light tweak combined with slowing down and making School and Elm more safe and predictable, that you would see that benefit that we witnessed on the Fall Fest flow from Main and Bow all the way to Mallet. And that what the benefit of that is that you would see that backup at Mallet start to shrink. And so folks would move consistently through town. Does that answer your question?
It does. So question two, you and I have talked about there's a lot of data that we didn't collect when we did our little demo with the stuff in the streets that got hit and then got put back up in better places. And like I felt like we learned a lot of great things about that, but what we never captured is the effect that it had on other streets. Um, all these streets work together, and I think I know like what it did to my street, and I think I know what it did to Park Street, but because we never actually captured that data, we don't really have a measurement, right? Um, and that would be my issue with not doing the full demonstration project. Um, what I've been telling people up and down my street as I walk my son's dog. Um, we're going to have another demonstration and we'll be able to look at things like that when we do our other demonstration project. So I don't know the answer to that question.
That's fair. I think that's a good observation. That's frankly, why we wanted to have this discussion tonight, I think, is that there is a sense that I've heard clearly articulated from thoughtful people that doing another demonstration could add confusion, that we've got folks who got accustomed to the always stop and now they're not, and there's some confusion there, and concern that introducing another layer um, would only confuse the matter. And then we have the perspective that you just articulated, which is that there is some benefit to, running it back and doing it again. I guess the question I think that I've heard debated as well is to do Main and Bow again, um, because to do it full on would be fairly expensive. It would be labor intensive, and it would also be harder to be nimble in changes because we're talking about Jersey barriers, not posts, and that a lot of the issues that folks had with the demonstration at Main and Bow arguably boiled down to visuals and how confusing the posts were and the signage and all of that. So I think there's value in both perspectives. The question I think we need to answer, or at least I'm curious about, is where we fall on that spectrum of a cost benefit. And
Well, it's tough to be nimble when we put in curb too. I mean, right, if we just go ahead and do this without doing another demonstration, without making an informed decision, that's potentially pretty darn expensive as well.
yeah, it's a fair point.
Is there, I just might, is there any other way to kind of understand the impact? Is there modeling? Is there technology or software that helps with, like, I feel like there has to be traffic modeling software out there. Or we don't have to actually build it physically in place, but we can understand flow.
Sophie's hands up. I don't know if that's because she has something to offer
So
or it's
there
some,
is traffic modeling software. I would just say you have to um, take into consideration it's using the inputs that are given to it. So just like when Stantec drew the initial design that we had issues with because they used some of that very same modeling software for turns and things like that. Um, but no, we've seen that. I used that when we were looking at putting a roundabout in the town I was in before, and it's interesting. It shows choices. I will say that it is likely anything that you do to slow or change traffic patterns on the throughway of Route 1 is likely going to push people to seek alternate workarounds. And so I think you really need to I think that's a conversation to have. You're going to push more traffic onto West Street, South Street, Depot Street, East Street. Um, and when you do that, the question becomes what's an acceptable amount, right? And um, to make some of the changes you're talking about for the Route 1 in the village, you are trying to slow traffic down to reach some other compatibility. So I I think we kind of know what will happen, the degree to what it will happen, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how valid the modeling will be. I think it will give you an idea, but it isn't something that I would feel comfortable standing up here and saying this is what it's going to look like.
the only thing I would add to that is there are fundamental differences between this plan that Stantec sketched out and ultimately what was put in the ground in the fall, uh, that were not fully understood the impact that they would have. And I think I can't stress enough, but in particular, having the approach on Bow towards Maine be tight to the curb created a series of issues that became a domino effect that essentially Earl and his team kind of chased around the intersection. So, for example, what that meant was on the southbound approach off of Main, that by being tight to the curb, the truck had to, pivot out wide, which meant that that sort of cascaded into where the tour buses stopped because it required an amendment to that area to accommodate the turn. So, you know, I think that there's a consensus that that move in and of itself would be very beneficial and change the experience of the intersection for a lot of vehicles, including buses and trucks and larger vehicles like that. So it's a tricky one. There's no question about it, Ken. You're kind of putting your finger on a key decision point.
Counselor Smith.
I just have a couple comments and then a question. I have been one of the people that has been advocating to do something in terms of a demonstration at Elman School, because I see that as a major issue for people coming from the east side of town, trying to get to 295 is coming up School Street and trying to get onto Main Street. And there aren't a lot of other good alternatives for that. There are some. But I would think that if we were able to make that intersection flow better for folks coming off of School Street, that might in fact take some pressure off the alternative routes of going to East Street or going up Upper Mass Landing, or some other things, that if the shortest route was a reliable route that you could actually get through off of School Street onto Main and then onto Mallet, that if we could get that traffic to flow better, that might actually take pressure off of those other streets. I also think that if we do not do the light adjustment or something in terms of management of the Mallet intersection, that no matter what we do on the rest of Main Street, that will get blamed, because really what's backing up is the Mallet intersection. And that was certainly the case with Main and Bow, where folks were frustrated because traffic was backed up on Main Street, and the obvious thing in front of them was the three-way stop, but in fact it was backed all the way up because of Mallet. The question I have for you, Brett, is I thought, and this may have changed again, but I thought that there was an issue where we were not going to be allowed to use the Jersey barriers in this test as originally planned. Has that been clarified with MDOT?
Yeah, essentially the way I think we've landed. So if you go back to the sketch here, there's concern about where the crosswalks land. So for example, you can see the one, if it's moved up off on Bow up to the intersection, flush with Route 1, not tucked back, and you didn't have barriers, then you would have pedestrians sort of out in the roadway without much protection. And there's other areas along that. It'd be the same coming across if we were to learn. Essentially, the only way, if you put a crosswalk from the flagship to the LOB to Linda's restaurant, you'd have a similar instance where you'd have pedestrians sort of out in an area that is not barricaded, and there's concern about that. And so chasing the solution around, you kind of come back to where you started, and that is that it's really tricky to do a light version of this trial. We tried that in the fall with posts, and there were some issues that came out of that, and that to attempt to try to do a hybrid, again, would be challenging. There was some discussion about sort of like fake curbs for lack of a better phrase. There's delineators that are 6 inches high and they'll protect a bike lane. There's still some interest in trying to explore that where you could do a true change of the intersection in a way that didn't have the visual clutter. But nobody that we pushed on that a little bit today, and it's a great idea, but nobody could point to an example that was actually approved and could meet the Federal Highway Administration. So we haven't given up on that entirely, but it's looking unlikely that there is a solution there that allows us to do something without full barricades.
And then the other thing I would just point out is that this version, there is an additional change here besides the activation area, which is that third crosswalk that's being added. And I do think that's important to call out if we're thinking about that as part of the final design. That has not been tested because that was not part of the trial last year. And so that that double crosswalk is just a whole other change for people in terms of what they're looking at for pedestrians too.
Yeah, so to that point, there I'll share this for your benefit, but one of the ideas that came up would be essentially installing sort of fake asphalt curbs where they would go. The idea was it would cost 75 grand. Um, it would have sort of a dubious appearance, but you would have an opportunity to truly delineate the intersection. And the assumption would be that those asphalt sort of curbs would last 2 to 3 years. So there's a world in which you could allocate that kind of funding. We probably need to bid it out for staff capacity, is what I've gathered, and expertise and just technical ability. And then with that material and that type of application, and you could test that and then potentially have it remain in place for a period of years until you could get to a point of construction. We also asked the question, just so you guys understand the scope of the conversation, is there a way where not only we say we've learned what we could and we don't want to move forward with renderings, we actually want to go ahead and see if we could build this and install it. What would that cost? How long would it take? And through permitting and right-of-way analysis and probably some survey would be required. You'd be looking at probably plans, I think it was fall of 2027, and then construction of fall of 2028. So we try to push on that angle too. So to bring it back, Eric, to your question, I think it sounds like if there was a desire to avoid Jersey barriers, the most clear answer I have heard would be to install sort of fake asphalt curbs where the ultimate curb would go.
Just to clarify, I thought that there was a concern that MDOT would actually not allow us to use the barrier, to even use Jersey barriers.
As, as long as, I didn't mean to cut you off if you had more to say.
No, that was my concern is it because I understand why we would need barriers of some kind. I thought that there was a concern that Jersey barriers were not going to be allowed.
No, it's a good point. They are allowed, but there can't be a blunt end. It has to be sort of rounded, which is tricky. You've now got to, you've got to figure out a way to change that angle and mimic a curve that's difficult with fixed pieces. So it would be challenging. And if it was installed and, God forbid, we identified an issue that was truly an issue, this would be night work to clarify as well. To install this stuff is happening in the night. And the nimbleness and the responsiveness that Public Works was able to act with in the fall, it would not be as nimble to try to tweak this. So it's something to be aware of.
Dan.
So a couple of things. I guess short opinion is that I'm in favor of options 2 and 3. Meaning, yes, I'd love to see the renderings and sketches. And I do think we should trial something at the School and Elm intersection, because I agree that that intersection is arguably more problematic and would benefit from seeing if a stop sign would work there. The Mallet Drive prioritization makes a ton of sense to see what we can learn from that. And I think it would help what I saw as one of the bigger problems that we uncovered this summer. My ask there is that I thought we were also going to look at potentially redesigning that intersection and even some of Mallet Drive, or at least looking at some alternatives there. So I would hate to see us tweak the light and say, yeah, that's better. Okay, we're done with that. Check it off and move on to the other intersection. I still want to see what that could develop into. I feel like that part of town is a little underutilized and would love to see some options there. So I don't want that to stand in the way of the traffic light thing, but I think that could be I'm hoping that's still on Stantec's radar to do something like that. For Bowen, Maine, I was where Ken was, right? So people were giving me lots of feedback. And part of my response was, well, next spring and summer, we're going to test something different and better. So hang tight and we'll give you another chance at it. So I don't like to move forward and not do that. However, in talking through what it would look like, it's another temporary trial, right? So Jersey barriers, fake curbs, traffic cones, whatever it is, I feel like people will react to what we put in the street and say, I don't like what I see. I don't like what it feels like. So why bother? And a lot of the benefits that we're trying to get with reactivating the spaces, fixing this tiny little sidewalk in front of Patagonia or Alpine, a lot of those things aren't really visible when we do the trials. So we get a lot of the negative impact. We don't see any of the positive impact. So I'm afraid that we'll get a negative reaction for the wrong reason. So that's why I'm hesitant now to do the Bowen Maine trial the way it's been envisioned in the sketch that Brett showed in the presentation. What I do wonder about is when we get closer to the vision for that intersection, right? That was a key catalyst site, the intersection of town, main town square, all kinds of things were said about that intersection, the potential thereof. And the activation space that we talked about in front of Linda Bean restaurant, right now we could barricade it off and move the crosswalks and we could say, great, now you have some asphalt to activate. It's not a very compelling space for anybody to hang out in. So I know that there are sketches of what we'd like to do there. Active public space, maybe public art, maybe seating, all kinds of stuff that we have dreamt up. The closer we could get to that, the better. So I know that doing that full on is probably millions of dollars and years away. But I guess here's where I land on it, right? So in addition to School and Elm trial, in addition to the traffic light test, in addition to sketching out Mallet Drive improvements, if we take the time to sketch out more fully the vision for Bowen, Maine, without doing a trial this summer, and we say it's a $5 million project or more, could we workshop that in future years? And either we get tons of support and everybody says, I love that, I can't wait for that to happen. Or, hey, that's a cool idea, but is it really going to work? And they're like, okay, maybe we need to do a trial. But we have that specific vision to test out, right? So it's not so much a traffic flow that we're testing out, because we've done that. What I feel like we want to test is, like, is it worth it? Is this vision worth it? And I feel like we're not quite ready for that test yet. So that's kind of where I stand. And then the last thing I want to say is related to that, which is that a lot of the feedback I got on our last trial was informal, ad hoc, emails, phone calls, passing people in the street. And one of the things that was consistent was, where was the workshop? When was the workshop? Did I miss it? Was there a thing? And I know that's part of Stantec's plan. That I saw there's one of the work streams is public input, and I saw some complete streets and council and planning board stuff. But I'm hoping that we'll have a big-ish workshop in the spring or summer when we can have this discussion that we're having now with everybody else in town and say, look, here's what we've learned, here's where we're going, and have it be something that people can also provide feedback if there are opinions on whatever we try out at School Street or Mallet Drive, a place where people can come and talk about it. And hopefully we have some pretty pictures to show as well. So that's my request.
Yeah, that's great, Dan. I appreciate that. I went back, if you can still see my screen, to the public
Yeah.
involvement, the work plan. And I think the idea is that if we can make good progress in the next couple, 2, 3 months on some of these designs, renderings, plans, that we'll be shifting at that time into sharing that with the public and with a survey, which one do you like, what don't you like, as well as some meetings and some, direct opportunities for folks to engage in person.
So
So
maybe in that May
yeah,
timeframe or so.
yeah, I appreciate you calling that out.
Yeah, great.
Anything else? Thank you, Brett.